I am Destro, and this is Realm of the Lich King. In this episode, going to be making a statue. First thing I need is a pedestal, but this pillar isn't going to quite work. For the statue, we're going to be using this WizKids Mini. This is like a $5 sort of thing, and you can pick these up at basically any place that sells D&D type stuff. These are really good for using as a statue because, you know, they're cheap, they're easy, right out of the box, you can use them. And they come with this nice little base thing, which is going to help me solve the problem of logos on top of that drink container lid. Yeah, no Tropicana here. So what I need to do for the pedestal, because my cardboard tube wasn't quite big enough, is I need to measure the interior circumference of that lid and draw out some stuff on a bit of cardstock to try and come up with something that'll be about the right size. I'm rolling it around with the tube there just to give it a little bit of natural curve to it. Cardboard likes to stay in the shape it's been moved into. And for the base, I'm just going to cut out a square of MDF. I do this off screen because I needed to use a hacksaw and I wasn't about to use that in my office. Now, I wanted to have sort of a tiered, layered effect for the base of the statue, and I didn't want to cut out more MDF than I absolutely needed to, so I decided to go with some dollar store foam board. This stuff, as you can see here, peels off really, really nice and easily. It's cheap, pick up from the dollar store, and if you get the more expensive stuff, the paper won't peel off quite as easily, which is not what you want for something like this. You want to be able to peel it off so you can texture that surface. Now, what I'm doing here is I'm just drawing lines between the corners of the piece of foam board as a sort of cheap, effective way to find the exact center. I want the statue to be centered on its little pedestal, so I need to know where I'm going to have to cut out the hole for it. Once I've got that centered, I can put down my my drink container lid here and just kind of trace around that a little bit in order to figure out where I'm going to need to cut out a hole. And unfortunately, cutting out a circle from a piece of foam board with a knife isn't exactly the easiest thing, and it didn't come out super cleanly, so there was a little bit of extra space. I used the pilot hole I'd cut on the first piece to help me figure out where to cut on the second piece, and once again it didn't come out super cleanly, but that one's the bottom piece. That one's not as big a deal if it's not super clean. We're going to fix that later. And as you can see, here we go. We've rolled up some cardboard. Not quite enough corrugated cardboard on that piece to fully fill out the little tube that I'm gonna need. There's still space in the middle there. But we'll put down some glue inside the cap, and we'll get some more cardboard so that we can roll up a little filler piece, and we're gonna have an absolute heck of a time trying to get this in there as a cylinder and lined up, and this was awful. I had just the worst time trying to get this in, trying to get it to fit, trying to squish it down. It got bent, it got twisted out of shape, I had to come at it with a knife, I had to try and force that piece in there, and technical. Okay, we feel a little better now. We got that little filler piece of cardboard in there. We can shove that in, and we can have a go at texturing some of the foam that we're going to be using. We want this to have more of a stone texture, so getting out the old trusty piece of balled up tin foil and going at it to give it a sort of more irregular stone-like texture. Now, with these rough pieces of foam board here, the edges weren't exactly clean. So I decided to strike at those with the piece of tinfoil as well and kind of smush them in a bit and crush down some of the rough edges and tear off little bits of foam. So they actually ended up looking quite a lot like weathered stone. I was really, really happy with the final result on these. Using a blunt pencil to drill out some, in here just the ruler, just cut out some little sort of flagstone-like patterns so that you can have a piece of stone as the base of the statue that's not all just one piece. It looks like it was made out of multiple stones. And then I use that top piece as a guide to do some for the bottom. But I did feel that the ones on the bottom would be a little bit too wide, so I went and added some extra. And then I used the hobby knife to cut out some little cracks in the stone. With the stone ready, time to glue everything down. Just kind of eyeballed getting this one centered. I didn't need to worry about it being exact, just, you know, close enough visually. Left the paper backing on the bottom of the foam board to try and provide a better surface for the glue to adhere to. And this is the part where we find out that the cylinder that I've made isn't really gonna fit in those holes. The holes came out slightly too large. I probably should have cut them slightly smaller. That gap there I ended up covering up with some tape. I wasn't originally planning to do this, but, you know, grab some paper tape there and just cover that up, give it a nice even surface. Ended up being a few gaps in the tape that I needed to squish down a little, but it worked out okay. And I was able to hide the gap line in the tape by just adding a couple of pieces of cardboard to use as a sort of extra decorative element on the statue's pedestal. Having another layer of detail like this in there can just really help your builds pop a little bit. Alrighty, time for sand. Everyone's favorite. Get sand all over everything. And Mod Podge the crap out of it. Alright, everything Mod Podged, all cured down, and while that's waiting to dry, I will make a little plaque to put on the statue's base. This is just a little square of plasticard that I cut out and filed the edges down a little bit to give it a sort of bevel, and then took this sort of metal awl tool and started scratching in little lines to look sort of like text. That's done. You can't really see it with just the plain white plasticard here, but once it's painted you should be able to see it a little better. Use some super glue to stick that onto the base, and here you can kind of see that I tried to use sand to fill in that hole, and that didn't quite work. It sunk down. So, super glue the little miniature onto the pedestal, and there it is. That's the whole build. It's all done and ready for painting. First step was, of course, to prime. Ended up using some of this Badger Stynel Res Gray. I hadn't used that before. Wanted to see how it looked compared to my other primers. And there it is with most of the base coats done. Painting this mini, by the way, is an absolute nightmare, and I would not recommend it. If you're just trying to cover the whole thing in turquoise, it's fine. But if you want to do anything like, you know, getting in there is terrible. Getting in under there, terrible. In under there is terrible. In under all the horse's bits and things, terrible. Yeah, not a miniature that I'd recommend as just as a painting project. That can be a problem with these one-piece miniatures. But since this is a terrain piece, I can paint it mostly with dry brushing. It was not too bad in the end. The way I did this for the main area of the horse was I just mixed up some verdigris paint into my turquoise. For the stone, this is wolf gray. Just give it a nice overbrush all over everything. Bring out some of that texture that I put in earlier with the tinfoil. And for the sand, I think this is brown sand is what I used for this. And this is just sort of a nice basic layer of color, simple terrain piece. And here I'm using metallic for that little plaque. It doesn't really make sense to have the plaque be metallic, bright and shiny, while the statue's all verdigrised over, but I don't care. This looks cool. I'm gonna put it on this way anyways. It's a different metal. Don't worry about it. It's fine. And now that everything's covered over, time to use a bit of the old secret sauce. This is some homemade black terrain wash. Used Liquitex ink and a bunch of other things. A good recipe for this stuff. And then, just sort of pour that onto the miniature, spread it around with the brush, get it all over everything, give the whole thing a nice coating of the black wash, and that'll really do a lot to bring out the weathering, bring out the texture, just make the whole thing look a little bit more complete. Honestly, you could probably do just fine with this as your last step, just covering this in the black wash, but I did want to push it a little bit further once I was done covering it over with this. And unfortunately, I think I made it a little bit too watery. You can see it's dripping down around there, but, you know, spread it out all over the place, it'll be fine. As long as you don't let it pool too much in one place, And with something like this, even if it does pool a bit, that's okay. Weathering isn't even. Having a little bit of uneven texture will really make the build look a little bit more realistic, unless you got tide marks or something. You don't want those. Yep, just a nice, big, long, satisfying process of covering this thing in wash. I decided to use a couple of other washes as well. I don't think I showed those on film. I might have showed the brown a little bit, but mostly just it's the same process. Cover it over with the black, wait for that to dry, cover it over with the other colors. Use a little bit of targeted here and there. I do show the targeted later, so we'll get to that, but I'm pretty sure I used a bit of my brown wash as well, and I just didn't show that whole process as I did for the black. Yep, here's the brown wash, just like I mentioned. Putting that in a few little places here and there. The black is mostly dried at this point, but you don't want it to be completely dry. You do want these to run together a little bit. This is just to add some extra variation and color in the stone. Stone looks more realistic when it's got a lot of different colors in it. Pure stone is never just gray or you know, brown or whatever color it's going to be. It's not going to be uniform. It's going to have little striations and variations and different kinds of inclusions and things to it. And this stone, of course, has been out in the weather for a long time as well, so there's that too. Once again, I really could have called it done here, but I wanted this rubble to stand out a little bit more, so we're going to go ahead, take this thing the extra mile, and do a little bit of targeted dry brushing specifically over that sand, as well as a little bit of targeted weathering here. I'm stippling the statue with my little cut-down stipply brush, using pure verdigris this time, just on the highest sort of points, trying to concentrate this on raised areas of the statue, and avoid the sort of recesses and crevices. You can see I ended up with a tide mark on the shield there, and I actually like that. I think it looks okay. I think it looks kind of cool. It's just this extra little band of weathering water sort of got caught there. And then, of course, the black wash, doing some more of these little just rivulets of grime running down this statue from the many years it stood outside. These, of course, specific ones helped hide some of the tide marks from that big line of brown wash that I had there. And I did a whole bunch of these along the underside of that plaque as well, just little short ones. This kind of little extra detail really helps bring a terrain piece together, in my opinion. I think this is a great sort of final easy touch to do. And there she is. We have a little bit of targeted weathering, the black with the sepia, and also here and there with just a little bit of black green. I've also tried to concentrate ink kind of on the pedestal where water would have dripped off the statue. With that's the paint scheme pretty much done, and the last thing to do is add a little bit of snow texture. Now this is of course optional, and if you're not building this for a snow-themed battlefield or a winter battlefield, you don't have to do this at all. But I want this to fit with some of my other winter industrial terrain that I've got, and of course there is the added benefit that you can use this step to hide any mistakes you might have made, like that gap around the base of the pedestal, because, and say it with me everyone, texture paste covereth a multitude of sins. And there it is covering sins right there. That place was the biggest gap in the little hole that I'd cut through the foam board to fit the pedestal in, and now it's all nicely covered with snow texture paste. I showed how to make this snow texture paste in the refinery video I did a little while ago. I might do a sort of individual video on the snow texture paste. This is all homemade. This is not a product that I have purchased. I made this myself. It's baking soda and a few other things. You have to add some white paint in there to make sure that it doesn't yellow over time. I've heard that can happen. But yeah, add a little bit of white paint in there and you should be good to go. And now just moving on to a few shots of the finished project. This cost about $6 or $7 worth of materials, I'd guess, and I think it came out as a really effective sort of piece. You could use this as an objective marker maybe in your games. With that though, that's it. That's the end of the video. I've been Destro. You've been great. Hope to see you next time.